นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Your blessings, good evening to you all. When the Buddha talked about knowledge, he talked about two kinds of knowledge: worldly knowledge, mundane knowledge, and then transcendental knowledge, the knowledge that takes us beyond suffering and its causes. And he didn't put down worldly knowledge or criticize it, but pointed out its limitation. That all the knowledge we gain about the world, within the world, cannot yet help lead us to transcend the world. And that's because the nature of the knowledge of the world is limited. There's no end to it. And we're always, humanity as a whole is always learning, researching, investigating things, forever developing new techniques to do things, solve problems, enjoy life, new forms of recreation, entertainment, new forms of trade and transaction, new technology to help the sick, but also to fight wars, defeat each other in war, and so on. Worldly knowledge, mundane knowledge, has no real end to it. And it can be a great cause of confusion and suffering as well, as we often use knowledge to hurt each other, even hurt ourselves sometimes. And you pursue different kinds of knowledge, but it never brings you to the end of suffering, to understand your own mind. Whereas transcendental knowledge, the knowledge of that comes about through cultivating the path, the Dhamma, the Eightfold Noble Path, has an end to it. So in that sense it's better, because it brings suffering to an end, brings one beyond what we call samsara, the endless cycle of suffering, birth and death, brings us to a place of peace, stillness. And it has an end, or a goal. Why can we say that? Well, because the Buddha himself reached that goal, Nibbana, the end of suffering, what we call the deathless, the unconditioned. And then all the awakened disciples of the Buddha since the time of the Buddha, monks and nuns, men and women who've practiced this path, have also come to the end of their suffering. So they've all proven that this transcendental knowledge works. Whereas the worldly knowledge, well, it's still developing. We have more information and knowledge than as human beings maybe than we did hundreds of years ago. But we're still suffering, just like before. In that respect, things haven't changed since the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha there were wars. In this day and age we're still fighting wars. In the time of the Buddha, human beings were exploiting each other, taking advantage of each other, and we still are today. In the time of the Buddha, people were getting confused and stressed. They still are today. People in the time of the Buddha were getting attached to things, addicted, lost, disappointed, feeling lonely, feeling afraid, and they still are today. That's the limitation of the knowledge of the world. It doesn't fully take us beyond these experiences. But the knowledge of Dhamma does. So it's better. So we say it's worth pursuing, it's worth cultivating in our life because it brings us to a better place, improves our life. It protects us, looks after us, improves us, brings us to true peace, lasting happiness. So that, in that sense, it's worth cultivating, worth putting effort into. And the way we cultivate this transcendental knowledge, or the knowledge that will take us beyond suffering, has to come through practice. Practice of and cultivation of this Eightfold Noble Path. So, beginning with right view, right aspiration, right livelihood, right action, right speech, right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi. Then right knowledge arises as a result, right knowledge, right vision, or what we simply call insight into the truth, arises from cultivating the Dhamma. And it's that insight that frees the mind from stress, confusion, delusion. Our teacher Ajahn Chah, many people used to come to him and complain about their lives and say, "Oh, my life is full of suffering. Lumpur, what can I do? This world is full of suffering, my life is full of suffering, my family is full of suffering, my work is full of suffering, everything is full of suffering." And he would sometimes answer with a chuckle, a smile, and say, "Well, the problem is not really the world is suffering or your family is suffering, it's your mind. The suffering arises in your mind. That's the place of suffering and confusion." When we study the knowledge of the world, we tend to attribute all the problems of the world to these external causes. We're always looking for someone to blame, something to blame, or a scapegoat. And we forget to look inwards. But the way of the noble path is that it takes us looking inwards, brings us inwards. It's introspective. But that's challenging because we spend most of our day looking outwards at the world, finding out about the world, judging it, thinking about it. And that's where we get lost. confused and deluded. The way of Dhamma is taking us out of confusion, it's turning our attention inwards to look at things more deeply, investigate more deeply. And that's why it's worth cultivating meditation, mindfulness, right effort and insight into the way things are. But we have to do that by turning this attention around and looking back at ourselves and what we have here in our lives. We have a body and a mind. That mind is made up with feelings and memories and thoughts, and sense consciousness. And this is where we have to learn and find out the truth, more than out there in the world. And because the worldly knowledge has no end to it, you can spend your whole life seeking and searching for things in the world, searching for happiness, information, different experiences, pleasures, but you'll never be completely satisfied because it has no end to it. Whereas when you turn your attention inwards and cultivate this path, there's a chance that you'll bring the confusion, the suffering to an end. And the flavour of Dhamma is peaceful. It brings you closer to stillness, to a state of mind that is not suffering. That's its nature. So the more you incline your mind towards the Dhamma, see the Dhamma, know the Dhamma, the more stillness you have a chance to experience stillness. Because even stillness in the beginning of our practice can be something we attach to. Often people come to a monastery, even if only for a day, or to stay for a period of time, or sometimes to train to become a monk or a nun. They often are coming because they're attracted to the stillness, the peace and quiet. So like here, we're in the forest, people often say, oh, you're so lucky, you live in the forest, it's so peaceful. Well, that's true, and the Buddha praised living in the forest, wilderness areas, countryside areas. But generally speaking, it is more peaceful, more secluded than, say, the city, the town, the village, the household life. But you still bring your mind with you when you come into a monastery. And if the root causes of your confusion and suffering are still there in your mind, well, even a monastery can become a stressful place. Not so much because of the monastery itself, but just because you've got your mind with you when you're here. And also, if people come into a monastery, they're often coming because they're fed up with stress and suffering, which is fair enough. You get stress from work, from having a household, you've got one or two or many people in your house, paying the bills, learning to live peacefully with other people, with your neighbours, going to work, getting tired, paying the bills. And there's plenty of stress, and often people are fed up with that, they're tired of that, so they come to the monastery wanting a break, a rest. So they're coming to a monastery because they want to get away from things they don't like. Nobody likes suffering or pain. But often they forget that they come to a monastery, they're also having to set aside some of the things they like. They're two sides of the same coin, two sides of life. We have our likes and we have our dislikes. You come to a monastery, you may be happy, oh, now I don't have to deal with that issue or that situation or that person. But you've also got to accept the fact there'll be things you like that you don't have in the monastery. You know, it's a simple lifestyle, a simple environment. You know, 1 meal a day, simple bed, not much in the way of entertainment or recreation. So a lot of the things you're used to, the comforts, the pleasures, you set aside too, just as you're setting aside the discomforts and the things that annoy you when you come into the monastery. You're also setting aside things that please you and that you enjoy. Some of them at least. So you have to accept that. This is why Ajahn Chah said, you come into a monastery, you need a lot of patience and endurance, because you're setting aside both the pleasures and the pains, the likes, the things you like and the things you dislike. But we often forget that. We forget that we will not get everything we like, and then that often brings up some discontent. There's things you want that you haven't got. For people who spend longer in a monastery, often their habits change, their mind maybe becomes a bit more peaceful and they gain more insight, which is good. But then sometimes they become attached to the peace of the monastery, the peace of the forest, staying in a hut, or sometimes people go off, stay in a cave, or just some quiet place somewhere. And they get attached to that. You know, they've let go of certain things, which is good. So maybe their mind is more peaceful than normal than before. They don't have to deal with the hassles of work, the problems of family. They're off in their quiet place, meditating, living simply, and they get used to that. So in one sense, that's a good thing. But then it can also become an attachment. So you have the sort of the typical monk who's been in a cave or a quiet hut miles away from anywhere, and he comes back even to a monastery with more people in it, say, and he becomes disappointed or annoyed. Too many people, too much happening. Too many sounds, too many sights, too much of this, too much of that. Because he became attached to the peace and quiet of his hut or his cave. So even the stillness and quietness we can get attached to. You might call it a refined attachment, but it can still be an attachment. And then that means there's a cause of suffering there. When you encounter a situation where you're not getting the peace and quiet or the seclusion you want, your mind becomes irritated or confused, unhappy. So we need the patience, the resilience, and then to investigate. You know, even if you are achieving some stillness in your meditation or just in the surroundings, the place, this is still subject to the simple truths of impermanence, change, unsatisfactoriness. Because it changes, it comes and goes. We have more stillness and less stillness, more peace and less peace. And it's subject to causes and conditions. It's not self. It's not a self or something that you can control or own. You attach, the nature of things we attach to and cling is we have this feeling that I own this is me, this is mine, this is what I want. So if you attach even to stillness, it exposes your delusion of not seeing, not self. So the monk comes out of the cave or the kuti and gets upset because there's too many things going on. The longer you're a monk, the more you see this. It's quite a common experience. maybe only mild irritation, but occasionally it becomes very extreme. So, like when sometimes you have a monk who's been in a retreat situation, very still, quiet, serene, hardly anything bothering them, and they come out and just a few sounds and already they're getting upset. One monk came out of retreat and there were a lot of cows mooing. And some people find cows mooing peaceful, and calms them down. But this monk found them disturbing because he'd been in silence and he was attached to his silence. So he got really angry with the poor cows and started chasing them away because he didn't want them too noisy. So even stillness we can attach to. The monastery is a place like that. And meditation is like that. Even if you're at home meditating, you'll start to see where you're attached. So some people are attached to the stillness, the peace, the quiet, their own space, their own lifestyle, don't want anything disturbing them. Some people are attached to their diet, the kind of food, they've got to have it just right, just like they want. Air temperature, people, you've got to have your friends around you but not the people you don't like. Technology, you've got to have everything that you like around you, the right technology. These are what we call attachments, and we attach to the things that make us comfortable as well as the things that we dislike, that annoy us. Sometimes the things that make us comfortable bring us suffering because when we don't get them, then we suffer, we get annoyed. Ajahn Chah said we have to practice a lot of patience and then develop this insight, this true knowledge or knowledge of the way things are. To see the real suffering is not getting what you want or not getting what you want. It's the desire, the attachment and the desire that we keep falling into, largely by habit. Over time we form habits of clinging and attachment, identify with things as me, mine, myself. It sets up the causes for more suffering. Once you've got an attachment, then you have a sense of self, me, mine. Then you have a sense of, if there's a sense of me, then there's a sense of you, us and them, my side, my group, your group. Then you're forever suffering with the dissatisfaction of us and them, mine, yours. We develop a sense of trying to control things, push away what we don't want, what we don't like, or what we see as other, belonging to others, or identified with others, and then pulling towards us what we identify with as ourself, what we want, what we like. The nature of the world is, it goes according to causes and conditions. So the more we cling, the more we suffer. Once you have a sense of self, then you have what you like, what you don't like, what you want, what you don't want. Then you've got basis for clinging, attachment to a sense of self, arguments, disputes, even wars. It's this group and then that group, us and them. So it can be based on cultural differences, religious differences, political differences, or just a sense of self, me and you, my thing, not your thing. or your thing, not my thing. When you practice mindfulness, you come to meditate, a lot of that starts to dissolve away, and that's why we feel more relief from suffering, more peace. You still have a body and a mind, thoughts, feelings coming up, but when you develop mindfulness, you're just knowing things. It's this transcendental knowledge, it's the beginning of it, just knowing with mindfulness the way things are, but not grasping at what you want or what you don't want. Just knowing, oh, it's like this is pleasant and that's unpleasant, but not grasping, just knowing. Like knowing your body, your physical body, oh, it's like this. Whatever form you have a young body, or a middle-aged body, or an old body. You have a male body, female body, whatever the colour of the eyes, the hair, the skin, it's like this. When you know a body with mindfulness, it's just the way it is. And those preferences start to dissolve, the identification with the way it looks, what you like and don't like about it. And then that transfers if you contemplate the bodies of others. They're also just the way they are. So when you're truly mindful, even say things, important things like gender and age and race and colour start to disappear. Bodies are just bodies. 4 elements, earth, air, fire and water. And all the other superficial kind of things we cling to, identifying characteristics, our beliefs, our connections to people, who's our friend, who's not, who's our relative, who's not, who's in our group, who's not, who's one of us, who's not. They all start to dissolve when you bring up mindfulness. So as we practice meditation, say on the breath, and you are mindful from moment to moment, you're very quickly seeing what the mind is like when it lets go, if only briefly. It takes you to a different level, doesn't it? You're letting go of the identification with all these superficial labels and descriptions of society and beliefs and thoughts and concepts and ideas, and it's just knowing phenomena arising, passing away, sensations, thoughts. You're more aware of a thought as just a thought rather than the details of whether it's a good thought or bad thought, something you like, something you don't, something you agree with, something you disagree with. You're just noticing the characteristic of arising and ceasing. And if you practice regularly, you see that regularly, often. You get used to noticing a thought arise and pass away, rather than always getting caught up into the detail of it. So as you practice more mindfulness, then the mind becomes more spacious. And thoughts still can arise. You can still use your mind to think. You still have memory functioning. Your senses are still there, conscious of sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. But you're also aware of these universal characteristics, the arising and ceasing of thoughts, feelings, sense consciousness. So say when we're in the monastery, we have a chance to experience the peace and quiet of the forest, the stillness, but we also have to keep investigating more deeply, looking at our minds where craving, desire and attachment forms, and see some of the suffering, the confusion of that. Keep working to see through it, let it go. So I'll leave you with those thoughts tonight.